All right, we are live on YouTube.
All right, good morning, everybody. Let's get started with day 2 of our grants committee meeting. We've got our chair, Dan Brown, and our board members, Lindsay McCleary and Corey Owens. Welcome once again today. And I'd like to thank all of the 11 applicant partnerships from yesterday for their interviews, really helpful discussion and dialogue, and gave you, I'm sure, as a grants committee, a lot to chew on. And as we saw yesterday, we concluded with a straw poll. And what we'd like to do today is start with the results of the straw poll to kick off a discussion to arrive at a final ranking recommendation from the grants committee, which will go to the OWEB board at the July meeting. And just first a few words about the straw poll, just so we're all on the same page. A straw poll is just something to get a first kind of gut reaction to the ranking. The purpose of today's meeting is to deliberate on this ranking and arrive at a final consensus on it. So you don't have to stick with what came through the poll, but it really is designed to be a launching point for the discussion today. So before I put the results up, are there any questions or comments from the grants committee? Go ahead, Lindsay.
I have a question. Thanks very much for putting this together. Really easy to kind of digest the information and to read. I do have a quick question. Under the committee ranking column, there are 2 number 3s, and I just wondered if that was a tie for 3rd or if one of them should be 4th.
That was a tie, and we'll walk through that once we put them on the screen so everyone watching along can follow as well. Go ahead, Corey.
First, before we get into it, I just want to make sure I acknowledge the strength and the depth of all of the applications. It was truly, I have reviewed a lot of grants over the last 10, 15 years, and I have never seen this strong of a pool of applications where the decision is going to be really, really tough. And I really appreciate the level of time and attention that the OWEB staff and reviewers put into putting it together, and then the partners coming in and doing an interview, and then our chance to go through and look at everything. So just a big round of applause and congratulations, and it just really speaks to the strength of partnership and conservation in Oregon that this, these strong applicants came through. So definitely want to acknowledge that before we get into deliberations. I do need to put in my disclaimer as an NRCS representative and a non-voting member of the board member. I am giving a technical review and as a subject matter expert to the conservation in the state and not making a funding decision. And I have to go on the record saying that. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Corey. And along those lines, what we're doing today is simply putting them in rank order, and that is our technical recommendation. While we did put the dollar requests on the table, as I'll show in a moment here, that's really for informational purposes. Our main goal is to put them in rank order. The board will decide in July how far down to go in terms of the funding line and available funding in the spending plan. So if no further questions, I'll go ahead and put the straw poll results up so folks can see them. That didn't work, did it?
Nope.
Hang on just a second. I had the wrong square selected. All right, so we'll walk through the results here. And I did move that square on my screen, but it's still showing.
Here, you want me to
screen?
give me
Yeah.
that?
Oh, so we can just minimize this here.
Yep.
Okay. All right. And so this is the rank order in the straw poll. So we'll walk through what's on here. These are placed in order 1 through 11. We took the polling results from the 3 committee members and aggregated the scores to come up with this ranking. And so Number 1 is Klamath-Siskiyou Oak Network. Number 2 is the East Cascades Oak Partnership. Number 3 is the Siuslaw Coho Partnership. Tied for third is Oregon Central Coast Estuary Collaborative. And then in 5th, the Coho Basin Partnership. 6th, the Hood River Basin Partnership. 7th, Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative. 8th, Klamath Lake Forest Health Partnership. 9th, Oregon All Counties CCAA Steering Committee. 10th, Salmon Superhighway Partnership. And 11th, 10 Mile Lake Steering Committee. So let the group digest that for a minute or two. And then what we'd like to do from here is hear your thoughts on what you heard yesterday. See if you've got questions or comments. If these rankings maybe didn't come out the way that you thought they might, let's talk about that. Or perhaps if one of the committee members had their own rankings quite different from here, let's talk about that as well.
I'll throw something out there, and honestly, let me just first sort of repeat what Corey said. I mean, you know, there's no sort of bad project here, in my opinion. I reviewed heavily upon the sort of high, medium rankings of the technical review committees, because I'm sure they spent. Well, for one, I'm sure they have a lot more expertise than me, and I'm sure they spent a lot more time reviewing the details of the proposals. I thought my job as a board member was specifically to look at the board priority memos and look at these projects through the lens of the board priority memos. And I had a couple of, you know, the biggest problem I had with that is I was trying to eyeball the geographic locations for these projects to see how they lined up with the high priority locations identified in the board priority memos. So I would ask that sort of like leading in, I mean, the real decision will be made at the board meeting in July. And I think there's sort of 2 pieces of information that might be helpful for the full board in the decision making. And that would be sort of how well the footprints of these projects line up with the specific high priority areas that are identified in the board priority memos. So that would be, I think, one piece of additional information. When I was eyeballing it, it looked pretty good. But I think it'd be, if there was a better way to sort of clarify that, I think that might be helpful to the full board. And then the other, it's just a question for the board, because honestly, as a new board member of OWEB, I'm not sure how this plays out historically. But I don't know what the priority for the board is in getting representation across the board priorities. So I tried to do that a little bit in my ranking. So in other words, you know, before I had a oak woodland prairie habitat project come up as a number 2, I tried to sort of put in other priority areas. I am not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that we necessarily adjust these recommendations, but I do think that should be an important discussion at the full board meeting. To what extent we want to address as many FIP priority areas as we can, as opposed to just going with the straight sort of rank order of the strengths of the proposals. I'm just not sure how that works. But I do think it's worth a full board discussion.
Thanks, Dan. And it's interesting to note that when you look at the top 5 on the screen here, all 5 of those are in priorities that we have not funded before under the FIP program.
Oh, cool. Okay.
And so there may be some sort of coincidental dynamic going on here that is making that come into fruition that you were just describing, Dan.
Yeah. Well, and that's a very good point. I mean, this is 1 year, and maybe what I was just describing is something that the full board considers across, the whole spectrum. If we already have a lot of representation in some of the other FIP priorities, then maybe does make a lot of sense to go with these specific FIP priorities this year. So that's all. I think it'd be a good discussion for the full board.
Any comments from the committee? Go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for those comments, Dan. I would say that I also had that sort of internal dialogue or conversation about wanting to spread out the ranking in terms of kind of across the priority areas, as well as also across the state. I did feel like it was important to have representation in the different priorities in the different kind of OWEB service areas. That said, I did think that this ranking does reflect a lot of what I submitted in the straw poll. So I feel this is headed in the right direction, and good conversations will come from this. But I did kind of struggle with kind of ranking the two OAK projects as my number one and number two. I had that internal conflict. But again, aligned with Dan on this, I'm not in any way, shape, or form looking at modifying how those ranked out. I think that they're great projects and really valuable and going to do some really good work on the ground, and merited the ranking as 1 and 2 as they're displayed here. Also just wanted to point out, full disclosure, that I was part of the ecological technical review team review of all of the FIP applications. Really great projects. Also would like to say there isn't a bad project here, and so it was really a challenge. But keeping the ecological review to one side with the efforts that I provided back in the spring, and then moving into the OWEB board and the grant committee position, looking at it with the interviews that we conducted yesterday, some of the details and the strengths of the partnerships that I saw, that really went into my ranking. The one thing I will throw out there is during the interviews, I was really compelled with the Harney Basin feedback that we received. In particular, the Audubon Society basically called to action for how important that ecosystem is for migratory birds. And also the water conversation that it will be coming to other areas if it hasn't already. And I was really moved by some of what their partnership was expressing. And so I did rank that a little bit higher than it is ranked out in the collective here. So I'll just throw that out for conversation.
All right, and as you can see, the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative that Lindsay just referenced is ranked as number 7. So would the group like to pursue discussion of that? Is there some desire to talk about altering that ranking?
I would say, first of all, I agree with Lindsay. It was quite compelling, and even the the representative there from the that spoke up, talking about the importance of the OWEB funding to sort of continue the collaborative work out in that space. And it's a very, very, as we all know, a very, very tough space to work in. So so I kind of agree with Lindsay, and as I said, I was sort of looking for that kind of representation, but I don't think that's sort of a decision that this subcommittee necessarily needs to make. I think that's a decision that, we bring that up to the full board, in my opinion, and we just make sure that the full board is sort of aware of that, in that it's, you know, it's a really challenging sort of thing, is picking, you know, which of these great projects move forward. And I'm in a similar position to Corey. I'm not even a full voting member. But I would, you know, based on what I heard yesterday, Harney Basin would be a great project to fund, as would the ones that are above it. But I do think that sort of, you know, that representation, and again, the sort of, somebody put a lot of work into identifying the geographic priority areas. And so I do think we'd want to have a double check on the alignment. And I'm not sure, maybe that's already been accounted for in the technical review committees, in the rankings there. But I think that sort of looking for that geographic alignment is in the FIP priority area representation is something for the full board to consider.
Go ahead, Corey.
So I would just say overall, my list and the straw poll are pretty much in complete alignment, except for maybe one or two that are maybe a little bit flipped, which is great, though, that the three of us are seem to be, having had the same information presented us, seem to come up with basically the same kind of first step of the order. I'm looking at this thinking that, you know, if we're deliberating, we're discussing today and coming up with kind of a final list from a technical perspective, definitely the extremes seem pretty settled. You know, my top four were the straw poll's top four. And when I look at the budget picture that we know now, those seem to be strong, will be strongly recommended to the board. Where I've been focusing is in that middle section where we don't know quite how much funding is going to be, but there's probably going to be some more based on the conversation yesterday. And looking at kind of that of those projects that came out in the middle, and, you know, being able to make a technical call on some kind of order where if you're 4 or 5 or 6 is likely the difference of whether or not you're going to move forward. So looking at that, and what's in the middle, we've got, let's see, there's 4. So you get, with 10 million, you get down the top 4, the Klamath, East Cascades, Iusula, and Oregon Central Coast Estuary. And then it's the Coos Basin Coho Partnership, Hood River Basin Partnership, and Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative, to me, are kind of the 3 in the middle that are on the edge. If there was more funding, it'll likely be one of those 3 projects, depending on how much you get. And then after that, you know, I think from discussion purposes, the bottom 4 on this list, the Klamath Lake, Oregon All County CCAA, Salmon Superhighway 10 Mile, those were also on the bottom of my list based on the conversations and the technical reviews. So I don't know, Lindsay and Dan, you know, where you landed with Hood River, Harney, and Klamath. Were they in about the same order? I had Hood River higher up. Sorry, it would be Coos, Hood River, and Harney. I had Hood River above Harney and Coos, but that I think was going towards more that like diversity of projects and diversity of board priorities was why that one came up for me. But I could certainly see in those 3, it's tough to kind of decide which of those. They're, to me, looking at the projects cohesively and, you know, their strengths and weaknesses, you know, all of them had very strong partnerships. I did appreciate how the, you know, landowner engagement seemed to be high for all of them, especially thinking about what Harney has to do for landowner engagement. Harney was originally a little bit lower for me, but I could see how it would be in the middle. I did appreciate how on the Hood River one, it is somewhat reliant on other projects and other, strategic aspects of the overall work happening from lots of different players. So it's not as standalone necessarily as the other ones. And I saw, all of them seem to kind of be at about the same place with the monitoring. Could use a little bit more details, but it's, pretty good. It's good enough, or not good enough, but it's there and it's thought out, but maybe it's not completely clear in some aspects of it. So I don't know, Dan and Lindsay, if you had thoughts on kind of those three projects and their order, and if we want to focus the conversation on that, since it's kind of where the middle is, just as a way to start talking about more.
Sorry about that, I was on mute. Thanks, Corey, for that breakdown. I feel like that was really helpful for probably everybody who's watching. Is you just kind of walk through like, top tier, middle tier, and bottom tier. So thank you for that. Yeah, I would agree. A lot of how I voted on the straw poll is reflected here. I did have the Harney Basin a little bit higher, so I had it above the Hood River Basin, and I believe the Coos Coho partnership as well. So again, just for conversation, I would be interested in what you kind of walked through, and if you could scroll up to the top of the there, thank you very much. Yeah, so as you walk through the cumulative, the biennium one request, the second blue column there, the cumulative, as you walk down, you kind of see where that cutoff might be. And then, yeah, exactly, with potential funding, potential additional funding coming on, I would like to see that Harney Basin move up from ranking 7. I would like to see it in either 5 or 6, but I will just leave that there and see what you all feel.
Dan?
I had Harney Basin ranked higher again, but to be honest, because the East Cascade Oak Partnership was another oak woodland prairie habitat project, I had moved that down lower. Not at all because it's at a project level any better or worse necessarily, but my top oak woodland and prairie habitat project was, I ranked Klamath Siskiyou, as did you guys. So before I sort of thought about ranking another oak woodland and prairie habitat project high, like in a number 2 slot, I moved that down below others that I felt had, such as Harney, that had kind of more diversity of the FIP priority area. However, I will say I did that in isolation of what FIP priorities have been historically funded. And so listening to what Eric said a moment ago kind of shifted my thinking on that a little bit. In other words, if we have, so Harney was the closed lake, I think, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, so I was like, well, that's something that it's not looking like we're getting funded. I was very compelled by the sort of need expressed about that project from multiple stakeholders, and so I was like, okay, well, that maybe should be a little higher, but maybe we funded in prior years closed lake systems, and there's plenty of work already happening out in that sort of service area. In that FIP priority already. I did not do due diligence and look back to see what kind of representation we have in that space currently.
Yeah, and I'll just chime in here. OWEB staff, please correct me if I'm misspeaking, but they did have basically a phase 1 FIP already.
They're in the finishing stages of their first 6-year FIP. They were in the first cohort of 6 FIPs that were funded back in 2016. And so they're just wrapping that up. They're working on their last batch of projects right now from that FIP.
Gotcha. Okay.
I have a question, web staff, on when we do send this off, are we allowed, well, can we send it with some caveats? Like, we didn't consider prior and current existing projects. We weren't looking at whether or not there's a cultural history of making sure stuff is spread around the state geographically and by priority area. Will that go along with what goes to the board?
You may provide whatever context you would like for your
Okay.
recommendation. All of those things that you mentioned, Corey, that's fair game to mention in
Okay.
your recommendation. And further, it's sounding like there's focus here on the 3 projects that are currently 5, 6, and 7. And I think you appropriately kind of sorted that out as, where should our focus be? And it sounds like that's kind of a key decision point here as to whether or not the committee would like to either keep the order that's there, change the order, or put them in a block. I guess a word of caution about putting them in a block is that the full board is looking for your recommendation, and that would more or less be punting your recommendation to the full board. And so I think preference here is to keep a ranked list. And so then the question is whether or not you want to change what's on this table going forward.
I do have a follow-up question. At the July board meeting, when the committee presents the recommendations, do you have an idea on how much full board time is allotted to this discussion in a funding award decision?
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric. I think we've got 90 minutes. Correct. And that includes a block of time for public comments on this item.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Well, based on everything Lindsay and Dan and I have said, how about we put the Harney Basin Wetlands Collaborative in place order 6 and move Hood River Basin down to place order 7?
I am supportive of that motion.
I don't know if we're using parliamentary procedures or not, but that's a suggestion. What say you, Dan?
I'm fine with it. Yeah, that's fine.
Sounds like we've got consensus there.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we swap those 2 around, it sounds like the recommendation would be in that order, moving Harney Basin to 6, Hood River to 7, and providing the context that the committee was not considering geographic spread or diversity of ecosystem priority types, even though, as it turns out, the top 4 are in ecological priority types that have not been funded in the FIP program before.
We're also not considering the current projects on the ground, or I believe, in my opinion, this review is independent of if projects have had past FIPs, because I know Harney's not the only one, I believe, that had that. This
correct. The all county state
yeah.
did too. Yeah.
Yep. Honestly, I mean, I know we haven't been deliberating more than like 20 minutes, but to be completely honest, I feel very comfortable with the list as it is, since it pretty much, except for a couple things, really strongly reflected what I had already done. And I feel like at the board meeting in July, I'd be able to talk about my technical recommendations and the reasons why we put the list the way it was. I don't know how you feel, Lindsay and Dan. Not that we need to cut the conversation short, but we also don't have to belabor it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm real comfortable with how the ranking is reflected here, with the caveat of swapping the 2 that we just mentioned. Yeah, I don't have any other discussion points or lingering questions or desire to see a different ranking. And then also full disclosure, I think folks know that I have to hop off in about 20 minutes.
Well, that sounds good. We allotted more time than we thought we would need today, just in case. So not surprised that you got there in a little over 20 minutes, given all the work and thinking that you did yesterday. So I
Can we hear from Dan real quick?
Sure.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. I'm like I said, I'm totally fine. Totally on board with this. And so if we're kind of done with that, I do have one, when we're done wrapping this up, I do have one little comment about the process that I'd like to make.
Yes, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Dan. I just was going by your head nod.
Oh, sorry, I couldn't see him.
Okay, well, if nothing else, then Dan, we can move on to your comment.
Yeah, and it's really, it's not that big of a deal, to be honest. I'm a slower processor, and so, you know, on the agenda we had scheduled like 5 minutes between each interview, and honestly, I would have found it very helpful if we stuck to that. I felt very rushed. Like after I wrote some notes, and it's like I didn't really have time to sort of think right after the interviews. It was like just rolling right into the next one. And the pace was a little sort of rough for me. So in the future, I think it'd be good if we maintain that thought time in between the interviews, just to allow some time for us to collect our thoughts and sort of be more deliberate about what we're doing with the information we just heard. And even at the end, the poll, as you all know, I was the last one to get it done because it was just, you know, it's hard work. I mean, these are all super good projects. People put an incredible amount of time into this. And I wanted to do more due diligence and spend more time with it than I felt like I had during the process.
That's great feedback. Thanks. We will, as we always do, take notes on the process each time in the spirit of continuous improvement. So for next time, we will keep that in mind and stick to the schedule that we had laid out.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Any other closing comments before we adjourn?
Great work.
Thank you. We appreciate the committee's work on this. I know it was a long haul and a lot of challenging, focused work, and appreciate your deliberations today. And again, appreciate the work of the 11 applicant partnerships who put so much effort into this. And I do know that for those that don't make it above the funding line, hopefully this work will set them up well for competitive proposals in our open solicitation program, because the regional review teams always look to the strategic approach being used, and all of these groups having strategic action plans now in place well positions them for competitive projects in the open solicitation program. So thank you, and we look forward to the conversation at the board meeting in July.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks all. We'll see you in July.